Welcome to Editor's Take. I have with me Salil Tripathi, who is our contributing editor based in London. Salil, welcome to the Mint newsroom here.
Thank you.
You've just come back from Myanmar, and one has read a lot about the political changes there, especially the move to democracy, also the fact that Aung San Suu Kyi has been released from jail. So how do you assess the situation on the ground? You've met people there, you've spent some time, you've studied Burma for a long time. So can you give me an assessment of the situation on the ground there?
The first thing that can be said, Niranjan, about the situation in Myanmar is that it is very positive and hopeful. These are fundamental changes, these are serious changes, and these seem to be for the long term. I mean, they are not cosmetic in any sense. They have released a lot of political prisoners. They are talking about genuine multi-party elections in 2014. And people are talking without fear. When you go and meet people, they're happy to speak to you. They don't have an issue about being quoted. You have to be careful about how far to go with that, because you don't want to make them vulnerable. But actually they are, so it's a very hopeful time from that perspective. That said, one does not know exactly what is the thinking of the military, because the military still calls the shots. They have 25% of seats in the parliament, and in addition, the ruling party USDP has a huge majority in the parliamentary setup. Given that the extent to which the reforms have the conviction of and support of all the people remains largely an unknown. So there's still a lot more to be done, but this is certainly a very optimistic period.
That's good to know, but we've seen in the Arab Spring that political transitions can be difficult, that in places like Libya, Egypt, the transition to a democratic regime is not goes by a straight line. Now, how do you see the situation emerging in Myanmar? You've said about the long-term interests of the military in sort of helping this transition. There are also issues, we've seen recent riots in Myanmar, so the entire issue of what the nationality is, means what is the idea of Myanmar, so to say. A lot of these issues do get suppressed in military dictatorships, but then they tend to crop up in the most ugly ways once the transition democracy begins. So how do you assess the risks about overall these things?
There are many risks, but the model to follow, if I were to see a model, is probably South Africa. Where we are today is somewhat similar to the time when Mandela came out of jail. We are not at the stage when Mandela became president of South Africa, or the joint president with de Klerk. We are not there yet, but the release of Aung San Suu Kyi and the by-elections and her joining the parliament and taking the oath are the equivalent of Mandela stepping out of Robben Island. After that, if you recall the South African history, you have the Codesa process, where the constitution was written, and it was a very difficult constitution writing process. There was a lot of violence because Zulus felt they were being left out. And I think what you are going to see as the days go along is that as the pressure is taken off, some of the air will start releasing very quickly, and there will be some violence. People will start to stake claims by making certain assertions about themselves, and the path ahead will have to be negotiated extremely carefully.
Indeed. So what does this mean for India? Because Myanmar is obviously strategically located, right, between India and China.
Absolutely.
It's rich in natural resources, especially gas, timber, and both countries in a way have civilizational links to Myanmar, India perhaps even more than China. But over the past few years, when the dictatorships were completely in control, I think China had a bit of an edge over India in Myanmar. Now with the coming of democracy, with the fact that Aung San Suu Kyi is in a way has links with India, emotional links, how do you see this equation change between India and China in this new Myanmar?
It will be complicated. The main reason is that while India had excellent relations with Aung San Suu Kyi in the early years of her detention, those ties frayed. And they frayed for a simple reason, that at one point India, because of its own problems in the northeast, wanted better relationships with Myanmar, and it wanted some access to the natural resources in Myanmar. So sometime in earlier part of this decade, basically India stopped being as vociferous in support of the NLD. If you recall that she was given the Nobel Prize in 1991, India gave her the Nehru Prize in 1993, which is something India should very justifiably be proud of, to have spotted this and been a champion. And the democratic forces of Burma, as they called themselves, they had access to provide radio services and other news agencies which used to operate freely out of India. But at some point India cracked down on some of those activities and at the same time started building relationships with the military. It did not get any benefits out of it. The one big project that two large Indian public sector units are involved with is basically building a pipeline, the Shui pipeline, which basically takes gas from Myanmar but into China, in which India does have a 10% stake, but other than a 10% royalty, it's not going to get much out of it. As Myanmar changes and in assuming that it will be a more democratic Myanmar, possibly with NLD in government, what kind of a relationship India would have with Myanmar really depends on the kind of diplomacy India now undertakes with the NLD. And there are many people in the NLD who are fond of India. She herself, of course, lived in India, studied in India and so on. So she has very fond memories of that. But at the same time, there is this bitter taste of the last few years where some people in the party are not happy with it. So it's going to be a very delicate act to follow. China is way ahead of India in terms of getting deals. India ranks 22nd in terms of the number of investors in the country. And while sanctions are being lifted, it's good news for India in a sense that Indian companies can go more easily. But so will the Americans, so will the French, so will the Brits. So it's not going to be very easy.
You've met the lady, and I know in my various interactions with you that you are a bit of an admirer.
Indeed,
so give us some flavor about, obviously she's a lady of great inner strength, of moral courage, which is a very rare commodity in these times. So give us a flavor of your interactions with her.
She's extremely charming. She is incredibly without rancor and bitterness, but she's also very stubborn. She's hugely inspiring when she talks. She talks in full paragraphs. She thinks through what she has to say, and she speaks inspirational things. When she talks about investments into Myanmar, she openly says that I want them to be democracy and human rights friendly. When she talks about a new Myanmar and the kind of society it will be, she does talk in terms of civil liberties and protection for rights of everybody. Now that's hugely challenging and inspiring. Very often, as soon as a leader gets close to political position, the assumption tends to be that, temper some of those ideals and become a more realistic sort of a leader. But one of the remarkable things in the post-war period, and even in the post-Cold War period, is that we've had 4 leaders who have played an important role in their own societies, who come with this kind of an inspirational agenda. Mandela being one of them, Václav Havel being one of them, Dalai Lama in some senses, although he hasn't been as successful as he ought to be, and finally her. And it's remarkable to see that such people do exist, and such people are able to emerge victorious in the end.
Thanks a lot, Salil, for sharing your thoughts and your insights into Myanmar. That's it for now. We heard Salil speak about the changing situation on the ground in Myanmar, the changing strategic equations and what they mean for India, and of course a little bit of insight into that remarkable woman called Aung San Suu Kyi. Thanks, Salil.
Thank you so much.